Welcome to Victoria Electric Vehicle Association on YouTube. I'm Glengarry, president for my sins. With me is Jim Henshaw, my vice president and producer. And today we have Steve Unger, primary at Shift Energy. And today we're updating a video we did about 7 months ago, talking about what's before the BCUC, the BC Utility Commission, regarding net metering versus net billing for residential solar. So welcome to the video, Steve, and tell us a bit about what's been happening at the BC Utility Commission.
Yeah, thanks, Glenn. So it's been an interesting few months. Just maybe to back up the truck a little bit. So BC Hydro back in June of 2024 applied to move from net metering to net billing. Net metering is what we have now. It's a direct 1-for-1 kilowatt exchange of energy between us and BC Hydro. There's no money involved. It's very equitable. It's very easy. Net billing is different. BC Hydro will sell the electricity to you at one rate, and they will buy it back from you at a different rate. That buyback rate is now targeted at 10 cents a kilowatt hour versus typically for residential, we pay an average of about 13 cents a kilowatt hour, with the low step on 10 and the high step on 14. Eventually the residential rate will increase to the higher step at 14 or 15. So basically BC Hydro is going to make 4 or 5 cents a kilowatt hour on the deal. BC Hydro is saying they need to do this because right now net billing is unfair to people who are not on net billing, because those of us who are solar generators are not really paying for the services that that BC Hydro provides, because those of us, especially if you're net zero like myself, I really don't have a BC Hydro bill, but I do use BC Hydro services, on a cloudy, cold day like today or during the night, but I'm not paying BC Hydro for it. So they're saying those costs are being shifted to people who do not have solar panels.
You still pay your connection fee and everything, right?
Correct.
So the connection fee, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the connection fee is all about paying for those sort of less tangible things on your bill, like the connection to the grid and upkeep of the grid to your home and all those sort of things, right?
That would be my understanding, but apparently it's maybe doesn't quite cover all of the costs. And I do appreciate that BC Hydro costs have probably gone up. Running a utility is not an inexpensive thing. But nonetheless, like I said, their argument is that they need to shift some of the costs from solar generators or people with solar panels back to BC Hydro to fairly allocate the costs across the entire customer base of BC Hydro. Uh,
Okay. Well, let's take that works.
yeah, that's their application. Um,
Yeah.
since the application has gone in, it's actually quite a process. This is my first time as an intervener, and I am humbled by the process, exhausted by the process, but humbled nonetheless. Um, and through, I guess, the spring and the summer, it was up to the interveners to present alternative evidence to what BC Hydro has presented in terms of their justification for the rate change. So we did some market research. We talked to some people. We looked through their documents. We asked a bunch of questions. We sent those in. BC Hydro sent us back a bunch of questions. Interveners sent each other a bunch of questions. It's a very, back and forth. It's quite a legal process. All of it kind of culminating earlier in November. I think it was the first week of November, were the oral hearings with the Utilities Commission. And that was a legal proceeding where people went, I guess, to the BCUC office in Vancouver. Fortunately, this year they also allowed people to call in remotely. And it basically, I would liken it to, and again, I've never been involved in a trial or anything, but I would liken it to what I've seen on TV as discovery. So it was an
Right.
opportunity for us to ask BC Hydro questions, to ask BC Hydro's experts questions, and vice versa for BC Hydro to ask us questions, etc. So the whole proceedings lasted about 3 days in total. And I have to say, again, I was extremely impressed with the commission and with the proceeding, as well as it kind of humbled me that, what lawyers actually do that you don't see on, Law and Order, etc. But they were extremely well organized. And I have to say, as an engineer, not a lawyer, we were scrambling around during lunch and in the evening to try and catch up with what, all the lawyers kind of took for granted in terms of proceedings. So it was a very exhausting week. But it did allow everyone the opportunity to ask these questions to clarify some of the information that BC Hydro and their expert Dunsky had presented. All this is leading towards the final arguments, and these are written arguments that BC Hydro and the interveners present to the Utilities Commission by January 8th. And
Okay.
those final arguments are what the Utilities Commission or the panel of the Utilities Commission will use to decide whether or not they approve BC Hydro's rate application. I also understand that they can amend the rate application, a bunch of other things. But we basically, from this point on, it's up until January 8th for everyone to get their final arguments in. And then the Utilities Commission, it's my understanding, will decide by about the end of January, yay or nay, or I guess, somewhere in between.
Right. And that all seems very interesting considering on the public face, BC Hydro is going out every 2 years looking for more generation into the system.
Yeah.
Right? It's a rolling call for power,
Yeah.
and it seems to me that the power that residential solar brings is that a good 6 months of the year they're not having to push energy out to all those places. Plus, in my case, I've had solar since 2021. I make that electricity. My levelized cost of energy is 7 cents a kilowatt. Anything excess goes out to my distribution, my neighbors, and that's sold off by BC Hydro for 12 cents or more, depending on how much people are using.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
they didn't have to generate it. They didn't have to transmit it. They are doing a little distribution, but they're taking a lot of money off of it. So it kind of it seems odd, a solar owner, why they would want to get into that and dissuade more and more residential solar. It's clearly helping the entire system. Anything we're not using means we have more money in our large dam-like batteries. So, yeah, it's very odd.
Yeah. And I mean, your point's exactly right, Glenn. And that's one thing we tried to highlight, is that there are a lot more holistic, benefits behind people having their own solar panels. Unfortunately, when BC Hydro had their expert do their assessment, they kind of limited the boundaries or the scope of what they wanted done and said, environmental benefits are outside of the scope of your study. Societal benefits are outside the scope of your study. There are other benefits. Really, all we want to know is what is the benefit of solar directly to the BC Hydro grid. And of course, we argued saying, well, that's, yeah, that fine, but you can't not take into account climate change and societal benefits and transmission losses and all these other things. Yeah, that's what BC Hydro told their expert to do.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's no societal benefit to heating your home or cooking meals or, yeah.
Yeah.
I just fail to understand this whole thing in that if Glenn generates stuff, my understanding is it technically goes back to hydro, but in reality, it'll go to the nearest station and they'll use it locally before they send it further, correct?
That's right. Yeah, it's a, path of least resistance. So any
Yeah.
electrons, as Glenn said,
So,
that flows out of his house will go to the most clearest or the nearest neighbor.
right, exactly. So that takes a lot of pressure off BC Hydro. I don't know, in our case, to send power across to the island, for example, which I'm
Yep.
sure is costly. Um, and I'm also wondering, I'll get to another question in a minute, but is there anything? My understanding is everything I create over what I use becomes the property of Hydro
Yes.
to use, sell how they see fit. Is there anything to prevent me? Now, I know I'm not going to be able to sell it to Washington State or California or whatever, because that's way too complicated. But you know how in the summertime, if you need a propane tank refilled for your barbecue, you can go to a gas station and pick one up from some private company. You can go to Costco and refill it, all of that kind of thing. Is there anything to prevent me from charging electric batteries and letting people rent them or sell them? Or
Um, that's an I've never heard anyone propose that before, but I mean, feasibly, you could, and the electrical code doesn't allow for this yet, but you could take your, Ford Lightning, charge it up at home, and then drive it over to your neighbor and kind of
which
plug it
people are
in.
doing now.
Yeah. And then say, you're going to pay, I don't know, 20 cents a kilowatt hour for everything you take out of my Ford Lightning.
Right.
Like I said, the electrical code doesn't allow for that now, but vehicle to grid or vehicle to home is something that's going to happen in the future.
We have all
Um,
kinds of stories from members who charge at work, come home and plug in and take the power back at home. We had a guy last Christmas when there were a lot of outages who was keeping three of his neighbors going from his F-150.
oh, really? That's
And
awesome.
in that case, they didn't have access to BC Hydro because lines were down or whatever.
Yeah, of
But so did they pay him for making sure that those customers stayed warm and fed and whatnot?
course not.
No,
No.
Yeah,
which
Well,
makes you wonder. Anyway,
yeah.
yeah, no. So in the questions that the Utility Commission itself asked, you have any sort of feeling for where they're going with this?
The panel itself didn't really ask questions. They were there to facilitate the procedure and to make sure that we stayed within boundaries. We didn't go on too long. We didn't, that we adhered to the, whatever the legal framework was that was set up for the proceedings. Um, this was really opportunity for us to ask each other questions. So BC Hydro and the
Right,
interveners. Um, like I said, to facilitate us preparing our final arguments so that the panel can then rule on the final arguments.
right. So final argument are being submitted on the 8th of January or presented in a commission setting.
No, it's a letter. It's written submission.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that is interesting. So yeah, and just to, as we discussed a bit off camera, you're with a consortium, sorry, a cohort of other residential solar operators, correct?
Yeah. So our cohort, which I guess, informally is representing the solar industry in BC, is made up of myself from Shift Energy, Jeff McCauley from Charge Solar, which is, I guess, probably the largest solar distributor in BC, if not Canada. And then Ben from Riverside Energy, and they're based in Kelowna.
Right on.
Yeah.
Okay then. Well, let's reconvene once the BC Utility Commission has their submissions. And did they say how long they might take to provide a ruling?
I think they were saying by the end of January is what they're aiming for. But so hopefully, yeah, the
Really?
intention is that these new rates would come into effect in April of 2026. Um, and if you like,
Okay.
our cohort has actually put together a series of 5 talking points that we're using to kind of maybe answer some of the questions. So if you want, I can go through those really quickly and see if they don't answer any more questions for you guys and for the listeners.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So the first one is BC Hydro claims that net billing is necessary to shift 2.7 million in cost, and that's 2025 costs, of supporting self-generation from non-net metering ratepayers back to net metering ratepayers. So that was the point we made up earlier. In other words, BC Hydro argues that non-net metering customers are subsidizing net metering customers like the three of us. So our rebuttal is, first, BC Hydro routinely shifts costs between different types of ratepayers. For example, people in the non-integrated area, so that's places like Haida Gwaii, Bella Coola, etc., are subsidized by those of us in the integrated area. Large and medium general service customers pay a lot less than residential customers, and we're in essence subsidizing it. E plus rate classes, there's a lot of other cost shifting that happens within BC Hydro. And again, we're not criticizing those cost shiftings. In fact, we actually support those cost shiftings because we live in Canada, which is a social democracy, and we feel that it is important that people who have easier access to energy should support those people who have less easy access to energy.
Right.
Second, all the solar infrastructure has been installed at no cost to BC Hydro. So you and I have paid for it. And in fact, we have built the equivalent of 132 megawatt generation facility for BC Hydro for free.
All right.
Third, this cost shift that we talk about, the $2.7 million in 2025, equates to about $1 a customer per year. Although we've never done the survey, I would imagine if you talk to a lot of non-solar people and say, are you willing to spend an extra $1 on your hydro bill to support people putting solar panels on their roofs? I think most people would say, of course, that's a
Yeah.
no-brainer. Then again, like I said, we haven't done the survey. Point number two, BC Hydro states that net billing levels the playing field by compensating all rate from everyone at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. The problem is BC Hydro's own billing model treats different customer classes unequally with varying energy rates, demand charges, time of use pricing. The playing field isn't level when BC Hydro sells electricity. So when you think about it, LGS customers pay 6 cents a kilowatt hour. Resi customers pay 14 cents a kilowatt hour. Is that fair? So why does BC Hydro want a level playing field when it comes to buying electricity, but not selling electricity? Third point, BC Hydro claims that solar from self-generators has limited value because it's mostly produced during the summer, which is true. As I look out my window right now, it is pouring rain and my solar panels haven't even turned on because it's so dark out.
Yeah.
The problem with this argument is BC Hydro is now a net importer of electricity. In fact, in fiscal 2024, we, or BC Hydro, the province of BC, imported 13.6 terawatt hours, 83% of that from the US, at a cost to us of $1.38 billion. Much of that during the summer due to low reservoir levels. Wouldn't it be better if BC Hydro, for British Columbia's and for Canada's energy security, decided to support local solar generation so that, as you guys pointed out, we could keep the water in our reservoir because, let's be honest, that water is clear gold, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And it's ironic that BC Hydro is concerned about cost shifting. I'm not talking about cost savings. I'm talking about cost shifting of $2.7 million while they're spending $1.38 billion on foreign electricity.
Right.
Number four, BC Hydro asserts that net billing will support a healthy, growing renewable industry in BC. First, we did a recent survey of solar installation companies. We got 39 responses, which we think is actually a fairly good representation of the solar installer industry in BC. all these businesses expect about a 25% shrink in their business and losses due to net billing. We've had actually, this says 40, it's actually up to 50 now, letters of complaint going into the BC Utilities Commission from installers and contractors. And then second, or part of the reason for the shrink is, as I said, net metering is really easy to explain. You give them a kilowatt hour, they give it back to you. Net billing is not. It's like currency exchange. It's like arbitrage. It's actually quite difficult and for the most part, almost impossible for a contractor to model without at least hourly BC hydro consumption data from a client. So it turns every kind of solar sale or solar assessment into a science project or into a consulting project if you want to get it right. So it's very difficult to do. So people are just going to say, well, I don't understand it. I don't want it. I don't trust BC Hydro. Forget it. And is that really going to help the province buy less electricity from the US? I don't think so. Final talking point. BC Hydro claims net billing is a fair mechanism for compensating customers for surplus self-generated energy. In our rebuttal, all the modeling to date, both by industry and BC Hydro, shows that the payback periods are always worse under net billing compared to net metering. If the economics no longer work, homeowners and businesses will no longer participate and solar development will decline. This directly contradicts the recent Clean BC report and in fact, even BC Hydro's internal IRPs and calls for power, etc., like that. Finally, BC Hydro, in fact, although they've never directly said that, introduced the rebates to try and sweeten the taste of net billing and to try and level it out a little bit. One of the things we asked BC Hydro is, why did you not do a direct, economic comparison between net billing without rebate and net metering without rebate? But what you did is you compared net metering to net billing with rebate and then said, well, actually net billing's still a little bit worse, but not really that much worse.
Yeah. And as we spoke last time, that incentive to go to net metering is really kind of a poison pill. It is not to the advantage of the consumer and arguably not to the advantage of the BC grid on a whole. So
Yeah.
yeah, those are excellent talking points. And yeah, we should close us off today and get back together once BC Utility Commission has come down with their ruling. And once they do that ruling, does the BC government have to do anything, or is that just whatever the BC Utility Commission does is now the new rate, or things stay the same, or whatever?
Yeah, as far as I know, the BC Utilities Commission is the final authority. Once they give the thumbs up, then BC Hydro can make the rate change.
Okay, Steve, two quick questions. What's the rate that BC Hydro charges for people who are Bitcoin mining or running huge data centers to handle internet gambling or any of those things that they set aside, special services?
It would depend on the general services rate that you're on. So small general services, which is kind of your typical small business, they're paying about the same as residential, about 14 cents a kilowatt hour.
Okay.
Medium general service, which if I remember correctly, you know what, I won't remember correctly, but they're medium-sized businesses. They're paying about 10 cents they are paying 10 cents a kilowatt hour. To get to medium general service, you have to consume X amount of electricity and have a peak demand of a certain amount, which, like I said, I don't remember off the top of my head.
Right. Now, at Everything Electric, rumors were going around that BC Hydro was considering applying net billing to corporate customers, but not to homeowners. Do you know if that was true, or
that was my idea?
Okay.
I basically
it was
said
a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's another piece of the puzzle because, to finish the story, large general service customers only pay 7 cents a kilowatt hour.
Right.
So in fact, net billing is a good deal for large customers because they're actually getting 3 cents differential the other way, right? So they're
Right.
making money. Now, the reality is large general services customers, they use so much power or so much energy, I should say, that they typically feed almost nothing back to BC Hydro. Like usually 5 to 7% of their solar actually ever gets back to BC Hydro. So it's negligible. Whereas for us residential customers, we're sending about 50 or 60% of what we generate back to BC Hydro. So it's a big deal for us. So yeah, so my idea was let's do net billing for commercial and let's keep net metering for resi.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Because I mean, some research we done a couple of years ago is probably better now. There's roughly 900,000 single-family homes in British Columbia. Let's say only half of them can support solar. You put 8 kilowatts on 450,000 homes. That's a heck of a bump. That's a heck of an advantage in power that we can produce.
Yeah.
So
And one, sorry, I keep too long to think nowadays. BC Hydro is being very supportive for people who want to put in home batteries.
Yes.
But if I have a home battery, that means I'm selling less to them or providing them with less power. Correct?
Yeah. Yes.
So
So the whole.
why are they? Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Finish your question. Sorry, Jim.
I don't know that I can finish it. It's like it doesn't make any sense to me that they're encouraging people to increase their own home storage, but they don't take that into account somehow. I mean, if I'm sending them less, what's to prevent me from putting in a whole bunch of storage and never sending them in? And just paying a connection fee because I'll never need anything from them.
Yeah. So backing up a little bit, BC Hydro's in trouble. No, it's okay. BC Hydro's in trouble. They're basically out of power, out of energy, right?
Yeah.
I mean, and that's why we're buying, 1.4 billion dollars worth of electricity from mostly California. Ironically, a lot of that energy is solar generated.
Yeah.
But, and we flipped, 5 years ago, we were selling power to California. Now we're buying power from California. So what BC Hydro is trying to do is what they call demand side management. So they're trying to figure out ways to get people and businesses to just consume less electricity, particularly at the peak times. The peak times between 4 o'clock and 9 o'clock in the evening, typically when everybody gets home and starts cooking, doing laundry, etc. So they're incentivizing us to put batteries in so that we will run our houses essentially off the batteries between 4 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night, which is what I do for my house. And, I do get, I make about $5 a month doing that.
Right.
So in fact, what we're going to see come April, BC Hydro has said they're changing the battery rebate system to they're reducing it from $5,000 to $1,500 unless you have a battery that meets their peak saver criteria. And the peak saver program essentially means that you're going to allow BC Hydro to control your battery. Mm-hmm. So if they have a peak demand event or they have something, they're basically going to start discharging your battery. And that's what they're doing. And that's why they're supporting batteries commercially and residentially, is because they're trying to solve their demand problem, their capacity problem without, building a whole bunch more, probably billions or if not trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure. And I think it's a good approach. I think it's the right thing to do. I just wish they'd be a little bit more overt about it.
But they're already building huge storage capacity.
Yeah.
Okay. They just don't want to build more.
And like most organizations, there are several different, there may not be a homogeneous approach to everything. Left and right hand doing different things. And that's kind of what it feels like on some issues for sure. Anyway, let's cap it off here. And we'll come back to this topic once we have a report back from the BC Utility Commission and you've had a chance to digest that, Steve. Thank you for your time, Steve Unger, Shift Energy
Welcome.
Group. And yeah, we'll catch you at the next opportunity.